Hi, this is Doc Talk Live on Facebook Live. I am with Scotty
Sims.
Scotty Sims. I'm in Denver, Colorado today. I've been with my son. We're working on moving into Denver, and so I appreciate you taking the time and turning this into I guess a business trip. Although I don't really consider this business. This is kind of passion and pleasure for me. So welcome to Doc Talk Live. If you catch this on a rebroadcast, please, once again, maybe type in some questions later, and maybe Scotty could get on and answer them. Scotty is a mom with a daughter with a very rare disease.
Right.
And my understanding is that she was born with KCNQ2 encephalopathy.
Good job.
And this is something I never heard of. And I would, maybe we should start just where you just share your story a little bit, and we'll go from there. How does that sound?
Absolutely. So we have a 8.5-year-old daughter named Harper. And when Harper was born, she began having seizures within hours of birth, which is very common with KCNQ2. But without a family history of epilepsy, the doctors didn't really believe that that's what we were seeing, and so there was a lot of back and forth over the first 24 hours, and finally she had a seizure in front of one of the doctors, so she was admitted to the NICU. And the seizures began, 50 the first day, increasing. Not responding to any kind of medication. So what happens in these cases is they kind of have a protocol of a battery of tests they run, MRIs, spinal taps, and they were not getting any answers. So long story short is they do what they can to try to get the child stabilized, and you're sent home. Mm-hmm. During that time, a bunch of genetic testing was done to rule out causes, because her spinal tap came back fine, her MRIs came back fine. They just couldn't figure out what was causing the seizures. So we finally got the genetic test back, and they showed a change in the KCNQ2 gene. So back in 2011, when she was born, KCNQ2 was only identified with a benign familial type of seizure, meaning that the seizures, this is a gene that was inherited and passed down through generations, and the children would have seizures at birth. The seizures would ultimately stop, they would outgrow them, and they would go on to have typical development.
So at this point, you're like relieved. You're like, holy cow, okay, we know what's going on. And you're thinking, okay, we're out of the woods here.
Right. Well, and by the time we got the genetic test back, we knew it was more than that. And they tested us, and my husband and I didn't have a mutation in the KCNQ2 gene, so we knew that it was not this benign familial type, because my husband and I didn't have it.
Okay.
So there were a lot of unanswered questions. So during this grace period, we were doing everything we could. Just trying to get seizures under control, addressing quality of life, just trying to meet her basic needs. Later that year, my husband found a paper online that was published by a group of doctors out of Belgium and Australia that identified this new type of KCNQ2 where the children were not having these more typical outcomes, where the families did not have a history of epilepsy. KCNQ2 was not being represented in the parents as a mutation, and the children were having profound intellectual disability, global developmental delays, autistic traits and features, and this was not at all fitting into what they knew about this benign type. So that's where the newer identified
So this
type.
paper that your husband found was more typical of what y'all were experiencing.
Right.
And so from here, do you fly to Belgium?
We didn't fly there, but we called Dr. Sarah Wackusen and had a conversation with her. And so my husband essentially kind of diagnosed her because he found this paper and then went to her doctors. here and was like, I found this paper. This is what we think she has. And indeed it was. So at that time, it was called KCNQ2 encephalopathy. But now we're, 8.5 years down the road, and it's now these rare genetic epilepsies. A lot of them are in this group of developmental epileptic encephalopathies, meaning that the children not only have epilepsy, but they have profound developmental issues.
So you have a child that has a disease, and the disease no one really knows about, and then you figure out, you really self-diagnose what's going on, and then from there, is it then you create this support group, or you get these families together from around the world? What happens next?
So there's nothing on the internet at the time about it. All you can find is information and research on this benign type, but there's nothing about this newer identified profound type. So my husband and I went back to Google, and as my husband always says, we started Google, went to the end and back. And we would find families here and there, just things that were written on like blogs or chats and groups, and we connected with a handful of families. And before our daughter was born, I was working as a mental health crisis therapist. So I did what I knew best, and I created an online support group with just a handful of families. So we started with just literally a few families from around the world, and now we have over 500 families in our support group.
Wow, and so I can imagine, how do they find you?
Now they find us through the internet, because
So
when you type in KCNQ2, we started a foundation, a nonprofit organization to support research and awareness several years after our daughter was born, and so now people find us through that.
How has this affected Harper's life, and how has this affected other people's lives?
Well, I think for Harper, it's, Harper's, I don't know, that's an interesting question. There's still so much unknown about KCNQ2. I mean, we're learning more every day.
Has this created more additional research, and how do you, I guess you don't treat this, you manage it.
Right.
And so, but the goal would be to treat it.
Right.
Like I'm aware of other diseases, such as spinal muscular atrophy. Are you familiar with that? Where they have actually have now a drug, a genetic drug that actually inserts into the DNA and treats it.
Yeah, and our hopes are we are currently supporting and funding research to go down a similar path. KCNQ2 is a bit of a tricky gene in that it is represented in all of your body, not just in your brain. So we all have the KCNQ2 gene. Those with KCNQ2 developmental and epileptic encephalopathy, so KCNQ2 DEE, they just had a flip. One little blip in a part of the gene that just happened to be very significant that impacts them in a profound way.
Is that Harper in the background?
That is Harper in the background.
Very good. Okay.
It's KCNQ2 can be a little more tricky than SMA that you referred to go down that path. So we are working with top researchers around the world to figure out the best ways to do that. But as a foundation for rare genetic epilepsy, and like many other rare genetic epilepsies, we're working in all these different areas, whether it's gene therapy, we're working with industry, meaning pharmaceutical companies, to help develop compounds that might better address the seizures for our children. We're doing things like supporting animal models to help and further research.
Gotcha.
So we're kind of dabbling in a lot of different areas.
We're good, Ben, on questions. Super. So it sounds like with your daughter, it's more than just seizures. There's developmental issues, or there learning issues and things like that. So yeah. it's a global type of
Absolutely.
issue. And so is there any linked to autism, or is this related at all? Or
so with KCNQ2, I think what can be misleading for some people is our children have seizures, but in a large amount of the children, the seizures will subside and stop, and they're left with the developmental piece. And with that developmental piece, we often see a lot of autistic traits. And KCNQ2 is very much a spectrum disorder. So we have families whose children can walk and talk and even take spelling tests in school, and then those that are non-ambulatory.
The seizures cause brain damage.
It's not.
The seizures go away, and the brain damage is left.
The developmental issues are left. Yes.
Okay.
We have a question.
Okay.
Christy asks, what was one of Harper's initial symptoms that you noticed after birth?
So with KCNQ2, one thing we try to bring awareness to is it is one of the top 3 genes noted as of today that cause seizures within the first days of life. So a big thing for families and neonatologists and pediatricians and neurologists to look for that when you have a child that presents in the NICU or in your office or at home, a family at home, and your child is having seizures from the very beginning and there's no determined cause. The MRIs come back normal, the spinal tap, like everything seems to come back and there's no answers. A genetic epilepsy panel is warranted, and oftentimes KCNQ2 is the one of the top genes that is identified. So for us, it was seizures with no family history and no known cause.
So what is your optimism level in terms of, because I know nothing about this, and so this is a genetic disorder, and clearly there's research on genetic disorders, so they may be researching some other disorder which fits with KCNQ2, and so a treatment there may lead to a treatment here, or vice versa. So where does this fall into the global spectrum of genetic issues that potentially could be treated?
So with a lot of these rare genetic epilepsies, you have them in sodium channels, and KCNQ2 is the K for potassium is in the potassium channel, and then you have those that just have a disorder that maybe don't have an actual gene identified. But all of these families, whether we are families that have started foundations or just in the community, have all grouped together because there's so much overlap and crossover.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah, overlap and crossover. How does that affect this research?
So, like, for our specific gene, there is a sodium channel gene that is our sister gene. So we work very closely with the foundations for that gene because there's so much overlap. So many of the researchers and scientists are similar, and so we're coming at it kind of twofold from both sides to help bring awareness and fund more research and collaborate, because within the rare community, it's so hard. I mean, there's not as much interest versus something like Down syndrome or cerebral palsy that's much more well known. These are very rare and very much unknown.
Right, and I guess it would be hard to get a pharmaceutical company interested in something where there's not a huge population for a treatment. That must be. It
is, and we're very lucky because we do have 2 industry companies that are working on compounds specific to our KCNQ2.
That's excellent. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
We have a question from Frank. He says, late to the show, have you all discussed Carley's Law or the use of CBD in medical cannabis as a treatment for these epileptic seizures?
So Carley's Law has something to do with Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
It's specific to my state, I believe. Carley has epilepsy and has found that CBD, and I don't know that story perfectly, so Frank, if you type in something, that'd be great too. But Carly has epilepsy. It's significantly alleviated by using CBD, and obviously we're in Denver, and so CBD must be huge here as well, if not bigger. And then I think there's laws in Alabama to try to legalize CBD for compassionate use, like Carly.
So specific to our population, we have a lot of families that are either wanting to try and maybe can't because they're in a state that it's not accessible. We do have a lot of families that have tried, and it's probably a mixed bag of children that respond to it or not. What you have to be really, really careful about when utilizing things like CBD is that medical marijuana can actually increase the levels of certain anti-epileptic drugs. It can actually increase the level of some of those medications in the child's system. So you have to be really, really careful, and that's the thing we really encourage families is you really need to have the support of a doctor when going down this path, because you need to have these blood levels monitored. It depends if your child is on other medications as well. Our daughter did a couple rounds of CBD. We did not. She has been seizure free since she was 5 weeks old.
Seizure free since 5 weeks.
5 weeks old, and she's 8.5 years now.
Is that because she is on these medicines, or she's off all medicines?
She's off all medicines.
So why isn't this the benign type where it goes away?
Because she's left with the profound developmental piece.
So again, I'm going to reiterate this. Maybe I have it wrong, but is it the seizure disorder that caused, let's say, encephalopathic damage, or is it that she still has this genetic mutation that causes developmental issues?
It's the latter. So and that was information that researchers in the beginning felt that the seizures were causing the developmental issues.
As I alluded to, but that's not true.
It's not. And sitting in a room with some of these top researchers, the story I shared with them, because we support scientific research meetings, was we have families in our group where the children stopped having seizures, like our daughter, at a very early age, and they have profound developmental issues. And then we have families whose children have active seizures every day, go into status, meaning they need rescue medication, they need to go to the hospital, they need emergency transport, they're prolonged seizures, and they can walk and talk. And so the seizures within KCNQ2, obviously seizures are not good for your brain, but the developmental issues are separate from that.
So what are Harper's specific issues that you're dealing with as a mom?
It's her profound developmental and her cognitive piece. So Harper's ambulatory, she can walk, but she's nonverbal, and at 8.5 years old, she functions depending on the task, anywhere from 6 to 12 months. So she needs full-on support. So the mobility issues are not as great as the cognitive issues. And that's for our daughter. That's not, like I said, it's KCNQ2, like a lot of these, every child is very unique. You have children that are non-ambulatory that require full-on support from the families, aren't able to hold their head, they don't have good, they don't have hand-eye coordination.
So do you have sitters? Do you have home health care aides? Practically speaking, how do you manage life in your family?
So for us, it's I quit my job, so I'm a stay-at-home full-time caregiver, and that's Harper again.
Yep.
A full-time caregiver. We have tons of therapies. My job is an advocate, fighting to get her the best therapies, to get therapies approved and covered by insurance, to get her into the best schools.
Do you go to therapy, or does the therapist come to your home?
We do both.
We do both. In PT, OT, speech, or are there other therapeutic modalities that I'm missing here?
So we do PT, OT, and speech. We also do augmentative therapy. Harper's learning to do some communication on a talking device since she's nonverbal. We tried that early on, but she was having so many other issues that we had to hold back, but she's doing really, really well with that right now. We also do a lot of ABA therapy, which is the designated therapy for autism, and
ABA, I'm sorry.
Applied Behavioral Analysis.
Okay.
And she does, I don't know, about 6 to 8 hours of that a week, and it's been life-changing. They break every task down for her to the smallest little minute level and help her to learn each little step, things that we take for granted.
So how, just practically speaking, how do you hire a babysitter? I mean, it's not like a babysitter can come and...
No, it's hard. It's a lot of screening. It takes a lot of time. Right now, we don't have any outside support. So it's very taxing on the families. It's also can be very taxing if they have typical siblings. That can be very hard for them. But for us, Harper doesn't always do well leaving the house, so we can, over the Christmas holidays, I was just telling her therapist, over the Christmas holidays where she's out of school for 16 days, I'll leave the house 5 times.
Wow.
It's hard. It's just she doesn't do well, and then given that it's been cold.
How do people reach your support group? How would they, let's say, donate monies, things like that? How does that all work?
All that can be done through our website, which is KCNQ2 Cure.org.
Okay. And we'll put that up. We'll put that up on Doc Talk Live. Are we good, Ben? Are there any other questions?
You're good. Frank says, best to your daughter and your family. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks, Frank. And we're gonna we'll leave it at that for now.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, obviously.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We always want to bring awareness.
Excellent. Thank you.
Finish?
Yep.